She thought she was resting against a fallen, sun-warmed oak in the freezing blackwood forest. The intense heat lured her into a desperate sleep, but the steady, thunderous heartbeat beneath her cheek didn't belong to the earth. It belonged to Julian, the Alpha King, and by morning, she was bound. The winter of 1482 arrived not with a gentle frost, but with a sudden, violent blizzard that choked the village of Riverbend in mere hours. For Catherine Sterling, a 21-year-old apothecary's daughter, the blinding snow was not a curse, but a frantic blessing. It was the only cover she had to escape a fate worse than the freezing temperatures. Her father, drowning in debts from a failed harvest and a gambling addiction, had signed away her life to Silas Blackwood. Silas was a wealthy, ruthless merchant known throughout the Western Valleys for his cruelty, his multiple deceased wives, and his unsavory dealings in the black market of beast hunting. Catherine was to be married to him on the eve of the blood moon. Instead, she packed her satchel with dried meats, a few vials of healing tinctures, and her sister Margaret's thickest wool cloak, slipping out into the howling storm just past midnight. The Blackwood Forest was a forbidden expanse of ancient, towering pines and jagged ravines. Locals whispered that it was the territory of the Iron Fang, a legendary pack of shapeshifters who governed the northern territories with lethal precision. But to Catherine, the hypothetical teeth of a wolf were far preferable to the very real hands of Silas Blackwood. By the third hour of her flight, the cold began to claim her. Her leather boots were soaked through, her fingers numb inside her knitted mittens. The wind roared like a dying beast, whipping ice crystals into her face until her skin bled. Disorientation set in. The towering pines all looked identical in the dark, spinning around her in a dizzying waltz of shadows and snow. She needed shelter, or she would be a frozen corpse before dawn. Stumbling down a steep embankment, Catherine's foot caught on an exposed root, sending her tumbling into a shallow, rocky alcove hidden beneath the roots of a colossal, overturned cedar tree. The wind was instantly muffled. As she crawled deeper into the dark recess, her freezing hands brushed against something astonishing. Heat. It was a massive, dark mound, covered in what felt like the thickest, softest furs she had ever touched. In her hypothermic delirium, Catherine's mind rationalized it as a leftover bear's den or a pile of discarded pelts left by a poacher. More importantly, it was radiating an intense, furnace-like warmth. Trembling uncontrollably, her teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached, Catherine dragged herself closer. She pressed her frozen back against the dense fur. The heat seeped through her wet clothes, thawing the ice in her veins. She sighed, a ragged breath of pure relief, but the cold had seeped deep into her bones. Seeking more warmth, she turned and buried her face into the dense, dark mass, wrapping her arms around it as best she could. She felt a strange, rhythmic rumbling beneath her cheek. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like a massive heart, steady and powerful. Accompanying it was a scent that had nothing to do with dusty pelts. It was the intoxicating, sharp scent of pine needles, petrichor, and something metallic like fresh copper, like blood. For a fleeting second, alarm bells rang in the back of Catherine's fading consciousness. The mound was breathing, but the seductive lure of warmth was too strong. She was so tired, so thoroughly exhausted from running. As she drifted into unconsciousness, she felt the massive shape shift. It didn't pull away. Instead, a heavy, muscular weight settled over her, curling around her fragile frame, engulfing her entirely in a cocoon of sweltering heat. She dreamt of fire. She dreamt of standing in the center of her village square, engulfed in flames that didn't consume her flesh but seared her soul. She dreamt of a massive, midnight black wolf with eyes like molten gold, stalking around the pyre, its gaze pinned to her. In the dream, the wolf lunged, sinking its teeth into the juncture of her neck and shoulder. But instead of tearing her apart, the bite poured liquid fire into her veins, branding her from the inside out. She murmured in her sleep, leaning into the phantom bite, her hands curling into the thick fur of her savior. She slept peacefully, entirely unaware that she had just triggered the ignis vinculum, the ancient, unbreakable mating ritual of the lycanthropes. She had offered her warmth to a wounded alpha in his most vulnerable state, and in the magic of the winter solstice, the moon had accepted her claim. Light pierced the darkness of the alcove, a harsh, blinding sliver of morning sun reflecting off the fresh snow. Catherine groaned, her eyelids fluttering open. The storm had passed, leaving behind a profound, eerie silence. She felt incredibly warm. In fact, she was sweating. The scent of pine and musk was overwhelming, burying her senses. She shifted, expecting to feel the rough texture of the animal pelts she had clung to in the night. Instead, her cheek slid against smooth, blazing, hot, bare skin. Catherine froze. Her breath hitched in her throat. She slowly tilted her head up. She was not holding a pile of furs. She was tangled in the arms of a man. He was massive, his chest a broad expanse of hard muscle scattered with fading, jagged scars. His arms, thick and corded with strength, were wrapped securely around her waist, holding her flush against his naked body. But it was his face that made her heart stop. He possessed a rugged, terrifyingly handsome profile, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed with dark stubble, and thick, midnight black hair that fell into his eyes. And his eyes were open. They were not human eyes. They were a striking, luminescent amber, the exact color of molten gold from her fever dream. He was staring down at her with an intensity that made Catherine feel like prey pinned beneath a predator's paw. "You're awake," he said. His voice was a deep, gravelly rumble that vibrated through his chest and directly into hers. Catherine scrambled backward, a scream dying in her throat as she hit the dirt wall of the alcove. "Who are you?" she gasped, pulling her cloak tightly around her shoulders, her eyes wide with terror. "Where is the fur? The animal?" The man slowly sat up, completely unbothered by the freezing morning air kissing his bare skin. He ran a hand through his dark hair, his golden eyes never leaving her face. "I am Julian Croft," he stated, the name echoing in the small space with an undeniable weight of authority. "And you, little runaway, slept on my chest." Julian Croft, the Alpha King of the Iron Fang. The beast of the North, who was rumored to tear men apart with his bare hands for simply crossing his borders. Catherine's blood ran cold. I didn't know," she stammered, pressing herself into the dirt. "It was dark. I was freezing. I thought you were a bear's den, or a pile of pelts. Please, I mean no trespass. I am only passing through to evade a pursuer." Julian leaned forward, his gaze trailing down to the side of her neck. A strange, dark amusement flickered in his eyes, quickly replaced by a possessive darkness. "Ignorance does not undo the magic of the old woods, human. You sought me out in my vulnerable state. I was poisoned, bleeding out from a silver-laced arrow meant for my heart." He gestured to a freshly healed, jagged pink line just below his ribs. "Your proximity, your warmth, your willing embrace." It triggered the dormant magic. "What magic?" Catherine demanded, panic rising in her chest. Before he could answer, a searing, blinding pain erupted on Catherine's left collarbone. She shrieked, her hands flying to her neck. It felt as though someone had pressed a white-hot branding iron directly onto her flesh. She clawed at her cloak, tearing the fabric away to look at her skin. Right there, etched into her collarbone, a mark was manifesting. It glowed with a faint, fiery orange light before settling into a stark, black tattoo, a crescent moon pierced by a jagged wolf's fang. "Make it stop," she cried, tears spilling over her cheeks as the agonizing burn spread through her veins, a literal fire racing toward her heart. "What did you do to me?" Julian closed the distance between them in a blur of motion. His large, calloused hands gripped her shoulders, surprisingly gentle despite his terrifying strength. "I did nothing. The moon did. You are experiencing the ignis vinculum, the burning of the bride." "Bride?" Catherine spat, thrashing against his grip. "I am no one's bride. I ran into this frozen hell to escape a marriage." "You ran from a mortal cage straight into an immortal bond," Julian said, his voice lowering, a low growl underpinning his words. "That mark claims you as the consort of the Iron Fang. You are my mate, and the burning will not stop until you accept the bond." "I refuse!" Catherine screamed, pushing against his solid chest. "I am Catherine Sterling. I belong to no one. Remove it." "It cannot be removed," Julian said, his golden eyes narrowing. "To sever the bond now would kill us both. The fire you feel is your human frailty, fighting the lycanthropy, trying to fortify your body." He reached out, his thumb brushing against the raw black mark on her collarbone. The moment his skin touched the brand, the agonizing heat vanished, replaced by a soothing, incredible warmth that made Catherine gasp in relief. Her body instinctively leaned into his touch, a terrifying betrayal of her own mind. "You see?" Julian whispered, his face inches from hers. "Your body already knows me. But we have a much larger problem than your stubbornness, Catherine Sterling." He pulled a torn piece of fabric from the dirt, a shred of her sister's wool cloak. He held it up to his nose and inhaled deeply, his lip curling in disgust. "You thought your escape was a secret," Julian said grimly, "but you were heavily tracked. This wool is soaked in crushed wolfsbane and grave dirt, a tracking scent meant exclusively for my kind." Catherine stared at the fabric, horror washing over her. "Silas," she whispered. "Your Silas didn't just want to marry you," Julian said, standing to his full, towering height, unabashed by his nakedness, as he grabbed a pair of discarded leather breeches from the corner of the alcove. "He wanted to hunt me. He drove you into my woods on the night of the solstice, knowing my patrols were thin and that I was wounded. You were never a runaway, Catherine. You were bait." Catherine's world shattered. The man she had run from had orchestrated her entire desperate flight. Silas Blackwood was working with hunters, and he had used her life as a pawn to draw out the Alpha King. "And now," Julian continued, his eyes flashing with a violent, terrifying promise as he looked down at her, "the bait has become my queen. Get up, Catherine. The hunters are coming, and I will not let them take what is mine." The forest, previously dead quiet, suddenly echoed with the deep, rhythmic baying of bloodhounds. Catherine flinched, instinctively pressing her back against the cold dirt wall. She knew that sound. It was the terrifying chorus of Silas Blackwood's prized hunting pack. Silas was not a man who left things to chance. He employed a ruthless tracker named Gideon Graves, a man infamous in the western valleys for hunting down debtors, runaway brides, and, apparently, shapeshifters. "They are less than a mile away," Julian stated, his golden eyes scanning the dense tree line outside their alcove. He tossed a heavy, dark wolf pelt over Catherine's shivering shoulders. "Can you run?" "I have been running all night," Catherine fired back, her apothecary training kicking in as she tried to suppress her panic. She touched her collarbone. The crescent moon mark pulsed with a dull, throbbing heat. But human legs cannot outpace hounds in waist-deep snow. "Then hold on to me," Julian commanded. Before she could protest, he scooped her up into his arms as effortlessly as if she weighed no more than a bundle of dried lavender. He didn't run. He exploded into motion. Julian navigated the treacherous, ice-slicked terrain with terrifying agility, leaping over massive fallen logs and bounding up steep ravines. Catherine clung to his neck, burying her face in his shoulder to shield herself from the biting wind. The heat radiating from his skin was her only defense against the bitter cold, and heaven help her, the scent of him was becoming dangerously comforting. "There, by the ridge," a harsh voice echoed through the trees. A crossbow bolt sliced through the air, embedding itself into the trunk of a pine tree mere inches from Julian's head. The metal arrowhead hissed against the sap, smoking faintly. "Silver," Julian growled, his chest vibrating against Catherine. Gideon Graves came prepared. 3 heavily armed mercenaries dropped from the snow-covered branches ahead, blocking their path. Behind them, the baying hounds broke through the underbrush, led by Silas Blackwood himself, wrapped in ostentatious bear furs, sitting atop a massive roan warhorse. "Well, well," Silas sneered, his pale, pockmarked face twisting into a malicious smile. "I sent my sweet bride into the woods to flush out a beast, and it seems she caught the king himself. How dutiful of you, Catherine." Catherine's stomach churned with revulsion. "You are a monster, Silas." "I am a businessman," Silas corrected coldly. The king of the Iron Fang is worth a fortune to the southern warlords, and his pelt, well, that will make a lovely rug for our marital chamber. Shoot him, but leave the girl. She is my legal property. She is my mate." Julian's voice dropped an octave, resonating with a demonic, echoing frequency that made the very ground tremble. Julian set Catherine down behind a massive oak tree. "Do not move," he ordered. What happened next shattered every human logic Catherine possessed. Julian did not draw a sword. He stepped forward, his spine arching sharply. A sickening, wet crunch of rearranging bones filled the air. His skin tore, giving way to an eruption of coarse, midnight black fur. Within seconds, the man was gone, replaced by a monstrous wolf the size of a draft horse. Its muscles coiled beneath its dark coat, and those intelligent, molten gold eyes locked onto the mercenaries. The hounds, sensing the apex predator, whimpered and tried to flee, but the mercenaries raised their crossbows. They fired. The Alpha King moved like a shadow. He dodged the first two silver bolts, lunging at the closest mercenary. His massive jaws snapped shut over the man's weapon, crushing the thick iron crossbow like a dry twig. With a swipe of a razor-sharp paw, he sent the man flying into the snow. Gideon Graves drew a silver-coated longsword, charging with a battle cry. But the giant wolf simply ducked, driving his massive head into Gideon's chest and hurling him against a boulder. Panic erupted. Silas's horse reared, terrified by the scent of the predator, throwing Silas into a snowbank. Julian turned, his fangs bared, ready to tear Silas apart. But as he stepped forward, a final, desperate crossbow bolt, fired by a trembling mercenary on the ground, buried itself deep into the wolf's hind leg. The silver hissed instantly, burning the lycanthrope's flesh. Julian let out a deafening, agonizing roar. Through the ignis vinculum, Catherine felt the echo of his pain, a sharp, stinging burn shooting up her own leg. She gasped, falling to her knees. The wolf stumbled, shaking its massive head, but the damage was done. Knowing he could not protect Catherine while weakened by the silver, Julian grabbed the collar of her cloak in his teeth, dragged her onto his broad back, and bolted into the darkest, most impenetrable depths of the Blackwood forest, leaving Silas screaming in frustrated rage behind them. They rode for hours until the forest parted, revealing a colossal fortress built directly into the side of a jagged mountain, Ethelgard, the stronghold of the Iron Fang. As they crossed the heavy iron gates, Julian collapsed, his massive wolf form shuddering before shrinking and twisting back into the scarred, naked man. He lay bleeding in the snow, unconscious. Catherine didn't hesitate. "Help him!" she screamed to the rushing guards. The fiery brand on her collarbone was burning brighter than ever, tethering her life force to his fading pulse. Catherine found herself covered in freezing, metallic-smelling blood, pacing the cold, uneven stone floors of Ethelgard's infirmary. The room was a cavernous space, dimly lit by sputtering torches that cast long, grotesque shadows against the walls. On the massive, blood-stained oak table in the center lay Julian, his chest barely rising. The stronghold's resident healer, a frail but fiercely focused elderly woman named Beatrix, had managed to extract the twisted silver bolt from his thigh. However, the wound from the night before the poisoned arrow that had initially driven him into the snowy alcove was festering with terrifying speed. Black spiderweb-like veins were branching out from the jagged pink scar beneath his ribs, creeping visibly toward his heart. "The silver is deep in his bloodstream," Beatrix murmured, her withered hands glowing with a faint, pulsing green magic that seemed utterly useless against the creeping blackness. "His lycanthropy is fighting it, fighting a war on two fronts, but he expended entirely too much energy, shifting, fighting, and carrying you across the valley. He is dying, Queen Catherine." "Don't call me that," Catherine whispered, though the denial tasted hollow and ashen on her tongue. Every time Julian's erratic heart fluttered weakly, a sharp, sympathetic spike of agony pierced her own chest. The ignis vinculum mark on her collarbone throbbed in time with his fading pulse, a constant, burning reminder of the life slipping away from the man who had shattered his own body to shield hers. "I have something that might help." A poultice from the old texts, a smooth, calm voice interrupted the grim silence. A tall, imposing man, with startlingly silver hair and pristine leather armor, stepped into the dimly lit room. It was Rowan Pierce, Julian's beta and second in command. He carried a heavy granite mortar filled with a crushed dark green paste. It is an ancient remedy passed down through the northern packs. It will draw the silver out of the blood and stabilize his core temperature. Catherine, desperate for any shred of hope, stepped forward eagerly to take the bowl from him. But as her trembling fingers brushed the rough stone mortar, her years of rigorous apothecary training flared to life. A sharp, pungent odor hit her nose, a scent entirely masked to a wolf's enhanced but overwhelmed senses in a room so heavily saturated with the metallic stench of blood and fear. "Wait," Catherine gasped, her eyes widening as she pulled her hand back. She leaned in, bringing her face closer to the paste. "This isn't comfrey or yarrow. This doesn't have the earthy base of a drawing salve." She looked up, the blood draining from her face. "I smell crushed monkshood and concentrated wolfsbane. This is a paralytic poison. It will stop his heart instantly." "You're trying to kill him." Rowan's perfectly calm, reassuring demeanor vanished in an instant. His pale eyes flashed with cold, unbridled malice. Before Catherine could draw breath to scream for the royal guards, Rowan dropped the mortar, grabbed her by the throat with terrifying, inhuman speed, and slammed her violently against the jagged stone wall. Beatrix cried out, lunging forward, but Rowan silenced the old healer with a brutal, dismissive backhand that sent her crashing to the floor, unconscious. "You have a very sharp nose for a frail human," Rowan sneered, his thick fingers tightening around her windpipe, cutting off her air. "Such a pity you won't live long enough to use it in my new court." "Why?" Catherine choked out, her hands desperately clawing at his iron grip, kicking her boots against his armored shins to no avail. "Because Julian's reign of arrogant isolation is over," Rowan growled, stepping closer, his breath hot against her face. "The world is changing, little apothecary. Men with silver and black powder are multiplying. Julian refuses to let the pack expand, refuses to ally with the southern warlords, and refuses to adapt. He clings to the old woods. Silas Blackwood is a wealthy man. He promised me the Alpha title and unlimited, uncontested hunting grounds in the human valleys, all in exchange for one simple, bloody thing. Julian's head on a spike. A massive, deafening explosion shook the very foundation of the fortress. Dust and small stones rained from the vaulted ceiling, and the distant sound of clashing steel echoed down the corridors. And right on time, Rowan smiled darkly, showing a glimpse of elongated canines. "Silas has breached the southern gate. The guards are currently suffocating on an army of mercenaries equipped with silver gas. It's over. The Iron Fang belongs to me now." Rowan tossed Catherine to the hard floor like a discarded rag doll. She gasped for air, coughing violently as she watched him draw a long, wicked-looking silver dagger from his belt. He turned his back on her, walking slowly toward the unconscious Alpha King. "Goodbye, brother. Your era is finished." As Rowan raised the gleaming silver blade high above his head, ready to plunge it into Julian's exposed chest, a scream tore from Catherine's bruised throat. It was not a scream of fear or helplessness. It was a scream of absolute, primal fury. The mark on her collarbone didn't just burn, it erupted. Catherine finally understood the ignis vinculum. It was not merely a brand of ownership or a cruel tether. It was a massive, dormant conduit. It was the ancient magic of the earth, binding two souls, designed to share strength in times of fatal peril. But the magic could not be forced. It required the human mate to stop resisting the change. It required absolute, willing acceptance to open the floodgates. Looking at the scarred, dying man on the table, the terrifying beast who had risked absolutely everything to shield her in the snow, Catherine made her choice. She stopped fighting the terrifying bond. She let her human walls crumble. "I accept," she screamed in her mind, her soul reaching out across the void to find his. "Take my strength, take my fire, live." A blinding, ethereal wave of brilliant orange flames burst outward from Catherine's body, accompanied by a shockwave of pure, kinetic force that knocked Rowan completely off his feet and sent him crashing into the far wall. The fire did not consume the room or scorch the stone, Instead, it funneled directly through the air, diving straight into Julian's chest. The black crescent moon etched into Catherine's skin flashed a brilliant, blinding silver, cementing the bond. On the table, Julian's body arched violently. His eyes snapped open. They were no longer just glowing golden. They burned with the literal inferno of the completed mate bond. The black veins on his chest hissed and began to recede, evaporating into thin air. The Alpha King moved faster than human eyes could track. He vaulted off the table, intercepting Rowan just as the Beta tried to scramble to his feet. With a feral, echoing snarl that shook the infirmary walls, Julian drove his clawed fist directly through Rowan's chest armor, shattering ribs and ripping the traitor's heart completely out. Rowan collapsed, dead before his body even registered the blow. Julian stood there, his chest heaving, the remaining silver poison literally smoking out of his pores, completely purged by the sheer magnitude of magic provided by his newly bonded queen. He dropped the heart and turned to Catherine, who was still kneeling on the floor. The savage, terrifying beast melted from his expression, replaced by a look of profound, overwhelming reverence. "You accepted me," he whispered, stepping carefully over the traitor's bleeding body to kneel humbly before her, taking her trembling hands in his large, warm ones. Catherine reached out, her fingers tracing his strong jawline, marveling at the heat radiating from him. "I accepted us," she corrected softly, her voice remarkably steady. The battle raging outside in the courtyard was brutally brief, with their alpha fully restored, radiating the terrifying, multiplied power of a bonded king. The Ironfang pack rallied with renewed ferocity. They descended upon Silas Blackwood's invading force like an avalanche of teeth and shadow. The mercenaries broke and fled into the snow, dropping their silver weapons in their terror. Silas himself was dragged kicking and screaming into the blood-stained courtyard. Julian did not offer the merchant a quick, honorable death. Instead, he handed the sobbing man over to the widows of the pack members who had fallen in the breach, ensuring Silas suffered agonizingly for every single drop of lycanthrope blood he had dared to spill. By the time the next full moon rose, casting a silver glow over the mountains, Catherine stood on the highest stone balcony of Ethelgard. She was draped in thick, luxurious midnight furs, the silver mark on her collarbone gleaming proudly in the moonlight. She was no longer a desperate runaway, nor a helpless pawn in a cruel man's game. She leaned back against the solid, unyielding chest of her Alpha King, Julian's arms wrapped protectively around her waist, his chin resting gently on the top of her head. Together, they looked out over the endless, snow-covered expanse of the Blackwood Forest. It was no longer a cage, nor a frozen tomb. It was her kingdom, untamed and wild. And the fire racing through her veins finally, undeniably, felt exactly like home. Did Catherine and Julian's fiery journey into the heart of the unforgiving Blackwood Forest keep you on the edge of your seat? Don't let their story end here. Hit that like button, share this thrilling video with your fellow fantasy romance lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more breathtaking, twist-filled werewolf dramas. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a single chapter. Until next time, stay wild.